A woman throws open the heavy doors of the church, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Rain plasters her hair to her face, her clothes are soaked through, and desperation fuels her every move. She's here to stop a wedding. But the moment she cries out, "Wait!" the sound slicing through the expectant silence. Every single head in the room swivels to stare at her. "You're at the wrong wedding," the groom states flatly, his gaze unwavering, a slow smile spreading across his face. He's clearly a man used to being in control, a powerful CEO. "But you're marrying me instead." A ripple of laughter flows through the assembled guests. Camera flashes erupt in a blinding storm. By nightfall, her face is plastered everywhere. She loses her job, her reputation, everything she's worked for. Then, the very same CEO who orchestrated this whole chaotic mess shows up at her doorstep with an offer she simply can't refuse. But behind his charming facade lurks a deep, unacknowledged grief. And behind her gentle kindness, wounds that run too deep for words. And when a long-buried scandal unexpectedly links their pasts together, they'll both be forced to make an impossible choice. Is this fate, or just a cruel trap disguised as love? What happens when the woman who crashed the wrong wedding becomes the only person who can possibly save the man everyone assumes already has it all? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now. And if this story resonates with you, please hit subscribe so you don't miss the next installment. Ava's fingers tightened their grip on the steering wheel as she carefully navigated the winding, rural roads of North Carolina. The late afternoon sun struggled to pierce the thick canopy of oak trees that lined the street, casting a shifting pattern of dappled shadows across the hood of her old, weathered Honda Civic. Her heart hammered against her ribcage, perfectly synchronized with the urgent beat of the windshield wipers as they fought to clear away the persistent, light drizzle. "Please, let me get there in time," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of anxiety and determination. The desperate, almost frantic phone call she'd received from her niece, Olivia, still echoed in her mind. Just an hour before, she'd been settling in for a peaceful evening with a cup of tea and a good book when her phone rang, shattering the tranquility. "Aunt Ava?" Olivia had sobbed, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I'm at St. Matthew's Chapel. I'm about to make the biggest mistake of my life." Ava knew exactly what her niece meant. The man Olivia was planning to marry had left a trail of broken hearts and shattered dreams, not to mention empty bank accounts, stretching across at least 3 states. The thought of her beloved niece falling victim to such a heartless predator made Ava's stomach clench with a sickening dread. A particularly deep pothole jolted her car violently, sending a jarring shock through the entire suspension. Ava barely even registered it. Her mind was racing, filled with vivid memories of raising Olivia after her parents' difficult divorce, of carefully bandaging countless scraped knees, and gently soothing so many broken hearts. She couldn't fail her now, not when Olivia needed her the most. The familiar spire of St. Matthew's Chapel finally came into view through the misty afternoon air. Ava's sensible shoes splashed through the puddles that dotted the parking lot as she hurried towards the church, clutching her cream-colored shawl tightly around her against the damp chill. The soaring strains of organ music drifted through the thick chapel walls. The wedding march had already begun. "Oh no," she breathed, quickening her pace even further. Her gray hair, usually so neatly styled and practical, had already begun to frizz in the rising humidity, but her appearance was the very least of her concerns at this moment as she reached for the heavy, ornate wooden doors. Ava threw them open with considerably more force than she had intended. The resounding crash echoed through the silent chapel like a thunderclap, and at least 50 heads turned in perfect unison to stare directly at her. The organ music faltered, then sputtered to a complete halt. Time seemed to freeze as Ava stood awkwardly in the doorway, raindrops sliding from her shawl and forming small puddles on the worn stone floor. Her eyes darted nervously towards the bride standing at the altar, and her heart lurched to a complete stop. The young woman dressed in white wasn't Olivia. In fact, Ava had never seen her before in her entire life. A warm, deep chuckle rolled through the stunned silence of the chapel, breaking the tension like a fragile piece of glass. Ava's gaze snapped towards the groom, and her embarrassment doubled, then tripled. The man standing so confidently at the altar was tall and undeniably distinguished, his silver hair perfectly styled, his impeccably tailored suit speaking volumes about his immense wealth and refined taste. She recognized him immediately from the business pages of the local newspaper. Adriel Trent, the high-powered tech CEO whose company had recently opened a large branch office in their small town. His blue eyes crinkled slightly at the corners as he looked directly at her. And to Ava's complete and utter horror, he spoke. "You're at the wrong wedding," he announced to the entire chapel, his voice resonating with undisguised amusement. Then he added with a playful, almost mischievous grin, "But you're marrying me instead." The stifling tension in the chapel instantly shattered. Laughter rippled through the pews like a wave, and camera flashes began popping like summer lightning, illuminating her mortified face. Ava felt the blood drain completely from her face as the full reality of her colossal mistake crashed down on her. She had burst into the wrong wedding. She had interrupted one of the most important and cherished moments in these people's lives. And now she was the unwelcome center of attention in the worst and most humiliating way imaginable. She backed away slowly, her sensible shoes squeaking loudly on the damp floor. Her throat constricted, making it difficult to breathe as she saw phones being raised, no doubt already uploading her epic humiliation to every corner of social media. The chapel's beautiful stained glass windows seemed to blur and swim before her eyes as she turned and fled into the pouring rain. The raindrops were falling harder now, quickly soaking through her thin shawl as she stumbled blindly down the chapel steps. Behind her, she could still hear the muffled sounds of laughter and the excited buzz of conversation. Her car seemed miles away, even though it was only across the expanse of the parking lot. "How could I have gotten it so wrong?" she whispered to herself, fumbling frantically with her keys. Her hands were shaking so violently that she could barely manage to get them into the lock. St. Matthew's Chapel. It had to be here, Olivia had insisted during that frantic phone call. But had Olivia specifically stated which St. Matthew's? Ava's stomach sank with a sickening lurch as the horrifying realization dawned. There were, in fact, 2 churches with that very same name located in the county. She had somehow chosen the wrong one, and in doing so had unwittingly turned herself into a public spectacle, a viral sensation for all the wrong reasons. Finally managing to unlock her car, Ava slid gratefully behind the wheel. Water dripped steadily from her hair onto the steering wheel as she sat there, completely paralyzed by mortification, unable to even bring herself to start the engine. After 30 long years of being the steady, reliable one, the dependable nurse who never lost her composure, she had somehow just managed to make herself the laughingstock of the entire community. The rain drummed incessantly on the roof of her car, perfectly matching the frantic pounding of her heart. Through the blur of her windshield, she could see even more wedding guests appearing in the chapel doorway, no doubt excitedly discussing the crazy woman who had so spectacularly crashed their wedding. And somewhere else in the county, at the other St. Matthew's Chapel, Olivia was probably walking down the aisle right now, about to make a terrible, life-altering mistake. Ava's hands fell limply into her lap as the full crushing weight of her utter failure settled over her. She had let down her niece, the one person she had sworn to always protect. She had thoroughly humiliated herself in front of what seemed like the entire town, and judging by the sheer number of phones she'd seen recording, her moment of mortification would soon be spreading far beyond the walls of that chapel. "Please," she whispered, though she wasn't even sure who she was talking to. "Please, just let this all be a bad dream." But the continuing, relentless patter of rain on her car roof confirmed that this was all too real. Her simple, well-intentioned mistake hadn't just ruined her afternoon. Felt like it had ruined her entire life. She sat there, listening to the rain and desperately trying to gather the courage to start her car and face whatever uncertain future awaited her beyond this agonizing moment. The relentlessly gray sky seemed to perfectly mirror her own bleak mood, and the chapel bells began to toll somberly, marking another hour of what had quickly become the most embarrassing day of Ava Porter's 55 years. Ava's modest sedan crawled slowly through the rain-slicked streets, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. Each seemingly endless traffic light felt like an eternity, giving her far too much time to replay the mortifying scene in her mind, dissecting every single agonizing detail. The distinguished, judging faces of the wedding guests, the blinding flash of cameras, and worst of all, Audrielle Trent's amused, knowing smile. They all swirled relentlessly in her thoughts like fallen autumn leaves caught in a violent storm. "Please, Lord," she whispered desperately. "Please just let no one have recognized me." The familiar sight of her apartment complex finally appeared through the persistent drizzle. The 3-story brick building certainly wasn't fancy, but it had been her home for the past 15 years. Right now, it looked like the most welcoming sanctuary she could possibly imagine. Ava parked carefully in her usual spot, gathered her damp shawl tightly around her, and hurried inside, keeping her head bowed low. Once safely inside her apartment, she kicked off her wet shoes and gratefully sank into her favorite armchair, the worn fabric feeling familiar and comforting against her skin. The room was quiet, except for the gentle patter of rain against the windows, and the soft, comforting ticking of the old clock her late husband, James, had loved so much. Ava closed her eyes tightly, trying desperately to find some small measure of peace in the silence. That's when her phone buzzed loudly, shattering the fragile tranquility. Then it buzzed again and again and again. Ava pulled it reluctantly from her purse with trembling fingers. The screen lit up with notification after notification, forming an endless stream of alerts. Text messages, voicemails, social media mentions. Her heart sank heavily in her chest as she saw several familiar names. Sarah from the clinic, several of her close church friends, even Pastor Grant himself. With growing dread and a sense of impending doom, she opened the first message. It was a direct link to a video titled, "Stranger Interrupts CEO's Wedding." The thumbnail showed a perfectly clear image of her shocked face, caught in that exact moment in the chapel doorway. "Oh no!" she breathed, her fingers hovering hesitantly over the play button. "Oh, please no." Then, with a deep sigh of resignation, she pressed play. The video was surprisingly clear, almost professional looking. Someone in the front row must have had an extremely expensive phone. There she was, bursting through the doors, the look of complete horror slowly spreading across her face. And there was Audrielle Trent, making that ridiculous quip about her marrying him instead. The video already had thousands upon thousands of views. More and more messages flooded in, overwhelming her senses. Some were genuinely sympathetic. "Ava, honey, are you okay? Girl, what happened? Praying for you." Others were far less kind, bordering on outright cruel. "OMG. Did you really crash Audrielle Trent's wedding? Saw you on TikTok. You're famous. What were you even thinking?" Ava dropped the phone onto her lap as if it were a burning coal, and pressed her hands tightly to her face. How had everything gone so terribly wrong? She had only wanted to help Olivia, to prevent her from making a catastrophic mistake. Now she was well on her way to becoming an internet sensation, and for all the wrong reasons. Across town in his sleek, modernist home overlooking the serene expanse of Lake Waverly, Audrielle Trent sat alone in his spacious home office, the last lingering rays of the setting sun painting the room in warm, amber hues. His laptop screen displayed the very same viral video that was currently causing Ava such incredible distress. He had already watched it several times now, each viewing drawing his attention to slightly different details. The genuine concern in her eyes when she first entered the chapel, the quiet grace with which she carried herself even in the face of such overwhelming mortification, the undeniable dignity in her hasty retreat. He leaned back thoughtfully in his expensive leather chair, fingers steepled neatly under his chin. Where others might have seen only an embarrassing and unwelcome interruption, Audrielle saw something else entirely. The woman's actions spoke volumes about her courage and sincerity, rushing headfirst into what she sincerely believed was a situation where someone desperately needed her help, regardless of the potential personal cost. It was incredibly refreshing in its unwavering authenticity, especially after spending decades navigating the often treacherous waters of the corporate world, where every single move was carefully calculated and strategically planned. His phone buzzed insistently with another message from his highly paid PR team, suggesting various ways to expertly handle the rapidly escalating situation. Adriel dismissed them all with a casual wave of his hand. This wasn't a situation that needed handling, at least not in the cold, calculated way they envisioned. The next morning arrived with a cruel, unwelcome brightness. Ava stood wearily in front of her bathroom mirror, trying desperately to summon the courage she would need to face the day. She had barely slept at all, her dreams filled with an endless succession of imposing chapel doors and accusing, pointing fingers. Her phone chimed with yet another message, this one from the clinic where she worked as a hospice nurse. Her supervisor wanted to see her immediately. Ava's stomach clenched into a tight knot of anxiety, but she carefully straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. Whatever was coming, she would face it with dignity and grace. The clinic's usually bustling waiting room fell into an almost complete silence as she entered. Eyes followed her every step as she walked slowly towards the supervisor's office, hushed whispers trailing softly in her wake. Mrs. Henderson, her supervisor of 10 years, sat stiffly behind her large desk with a carefully composed expression that seemed to mix genuine sympathy with thinly veiled frustration. "Ava, please sit down," she said, gesturing towards the chair across from her desk. "I'm sure you know why I've called you in." Ava nodded slowly, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The video, yes," Mrs. Henderson agreed with a heavy sigh. "Ava, you're one of our best nurses. Your patients simply adore you. But this has become a distraction that we simply can't ignore. People are calling the clinic constantly. Reporters are asking intrusive questions. We need to let things cool down." The carefully chosen words hit Ava like a series of physical blows. "Are you firing me?" No, Mrs. Henderson quickly assured her, her voice softening slightly. "But we are placing you on temporary suspension. Paid leave just until this blows over." "I'm so sorry, Ava, but we have to think of our patients and their well-being." Ava walked slowly out of the clinic in a daze, clutching her purse tightly to her side like a shield. Her phone buzzed almost constantly with messages from her patients. Sweet, supportive messages that only made her heart ache even more. "Don't worry about me, dear. I'll be just fine until you're back. They can't do this to you. You're the best nurse we've ever had. Praying for you, Miss Ava. This too shall pass." She was still reading through them, tears blurring her vision, when an unknown number called. Expecting it to be another relentless reporter, she almost declined the call, but something made her answer at the last second. "Miss Porter," a crisp, professional voice asked. "This is Jennifer Hayes, Mr. Trent's personal assistant. Mr. Trent would very much like to meet with you to discuss the current situation and perhaps work out some sort of public clarification. Would you be willing to join him for coffee this afternoon?" Ava's first instinct was to flatly refuse. Hadn't she already been humiliated enough? But as she thought about her newly suspended job, her worried patients, and the seemingly endless stream of increasingly intrusive messages, she realized that she needed to do something, anything, to try and resolve this rapidly escalating chaos. "Yes," she heard herself say, surprising even herself. "Yes, I'll meet him." Jennifer gave her the address of a small cafe downtown. Not one of the large, busy chains, but a quiet, local place known for its discretion and privacy. Ava spent a full hour carefully choosing her outfit, finally settling on a simple blue dress that her late husband, James, had always told her brought out the natural sparkle in her eyes. The cafe sat quietly on a corner, its windows gleaming warmly in the afternoon sun. Ava's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the heavy door. Through the glass she could already see Adriel Trent seated alone at a corner table, 2 steaming cups of coffee already placed in front of him. As she entered, he looked up and smiled. Not the slightly amused grin from the wedding, but something warmer, something infinitely kinder. Ava took a deep breath and walked slowly towards the table, her heart pounding heavily with each step. Whatever happened next would either make things significantly better or much, much worse. But as she met Adriel's gentle gaze, she felt an unexpected glimmer of hope begin to flicker in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, this meeting would be the first small step toward setting things right. Ava's fingers trembled ever so slightly as she slid into the chair across from Adrielle Trent. The cafe's warm lighting cast a gentle, flattering glow over the polished wood tables, and the soft murmur of quiet conversation provided a comforting, almost unnoticed background. 2 steaming cups of coffee sat invitingly between them, their rich aroma filling the air. "I took the liberty of ordering for you," Adrielle said, gently pushing one of the cups towards her. "I certainly hope you don't mind. It's just regular coffee with plenty of room for cream." "Thank you," Ava managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Up close, she noticed how his silver hair seemed to catch and reflect the light, and how surprisingly kind his eyes looked, so very different from the composed, almost intimidating CEO she had seen so many times in news photos. Adrielle cleared his throat slightly. "Miss Porter, first and foremost, I owe you a sincere apology." His fingers drummed lightly and nervously on the polished tabletop. "My comment at the wedding about you marrying me instead. It was impulsive, ill-considered, and thoughtless. I never even imagined that it would go viral, or that it would cause you such significant distress." Ava's cheeks flushed a delicate pink. "Oh no, please don't apologize. The fault was entirely mine. I burst into the wrong wedding after all. I still can't quite believe I mixed up the chapels. St. Matthew's and street marks do look remarkably similar," Adrielle said with a gentle, understanding smile. "But my poorly timed joke unnecessarily turned a simple mistake into a full-blown media circus, and for that I am truly sorry." Ava carefully added cream to her coffee, grateful to have something to do with her fidgety hands. "I suppose we both contributed to this unfortunate situation in our own way." "Actually," Adrielle said, leaning back slightly in his chair, "I should probably clarify something. It wasn't even my wedding. I was simply the best man for my godson, Thomas. The media just assumed." He shrugged, his voice tinged with a hint of weariness. "Well, they assumed what they wanted to assume, I suppose." "Oh." Ava's eyes widened slightly in surprise. "I had absolutely no idea." "Yes, the headlines." Adrielle chuckled softly, but there was a distinct undercurrent of sadness in his voice. "The media simply loves a good story, especially when it involves a CEO making somewhat scandalous headlines." He paused for a moment, taking a thoughtful sip of his coffee. "I lost my wife, Sarah, 3 years ago. Cancer. I'm still—" He gestured vaguely with his hand, searching for the right words. "Still learning how to live again, I guess." Ava's heart softened with a sudden wave of empathy at his quiet confession. "I understand," she said quietly, her voice full of understanding. "My husband, James, passed away 5 years ago. A sudden heart attack. It was so incredibly sudden." She traced the rim of her coffee cup with her finger, lost in thought. "I never remarried either." Something shifted subtly in the air between them, a shared understanding of loss and grief that needed no further explanation. The weight of their respective losses created a bridge of empathy and unspoken connection. "Faith helps," Ava added softly, breaking the silence. "Though sometimes it's hard to understand God's plan." Adrielle nodded slowly, his gaze meeting hers. "I struggled with that a lot after Sarah died. I still do some days, but I've slowly learned that faith isn't necessarily about having all the answers. It's about trusting even despite all of the difficult questions." They talked easily after that, their conversation flowing naturally from faith to family, from work to cherished memories. Ava found herself sharing poignant stories about her hospice patients, while Adrielle spoke openly and honestly about his long journey from a struggling startup founder to the CEO of a major tech company. "It's strange," Ava mused thoughtfully, shaking her head slightly, "how one small, seemingly insignificant mistake can completely change everything. If I hadn't mixed up those 2 chapels. Sometimes those mistakes are just detours to exactly where we're supposed to be." Adrielle replied thoughtfully, his eyes meeting hers across the table. After a brief pause, he straightened in his chair, his demeanor shifting slightly. "Which brings me to a suggestion. I could help with this situation. Arrange a short, carefully managed interview. Let you tell your side of the story. My PR team would make absolutely certain that it's handled respectfully and sensitively. Ava shook her head gently, though she genuinely appreciated the generous offer. Thank you, but no. I've never been comfortable in the spotlight. I just want my quiet, private life back, to be able to return to my patients without all of this unwanted attention. Adriel respected her decision, though a flicker of concern crossed his face. They parted ways shortly after, both feeling slightly lighter, despite the fact that the underlying situation remained largely unresolved. Ava thanked him sincerely for the coffee and his understanding, while Adriel thanked her for her complete honesty and unexpected grace under pressure. The fragile peace of their quiet meeting, however, was quickly shattered when Ava turned onto her street that evening. A large, imposing news van completely blocked her driveway, its satellite dish extending skyward like an accusing finger. As soon as she stopped her car, reporters swarmed around it, thrusting microphones aggressively towards her windows. Miss Porter, can you comment on your rumored relationship with Mr. Adriel Trent? Was the wedding interruption carefully planned as some sort of publicity stunt? Are you and Mr. Trent dating now? Ava's hands shook uncontrollably as she gripped the steering wheel tightly. Her heart pounded so hard and so loudly that she could barely hear their shouted questions over its frantic rhythm. With trembling fingers, she somehow managed to press the garage door opener, then waited an agonizing minute for the reporters to reluctantly move just enough for her to pull her car into the garage. Once safely inside her house, she quickly locked every single door and frantically drew all of the curtains. Her once comforting sanctuary now felt completely violated and exposed, her precious privacy completely invaded. She sank heavily onto her worn couch, wrapping her arms tightly around herself as tears threatened to spill over. Across town in his modern home overlooking Lake Waverly, Adriel watched the scene unfold on his large television screen. The reporter's aggressive pursuit of Ava played out in disturbingly high definition, and he could clearly see the fear and distress etched on her face as she fled into her house. Guilt tightened his chest like a cold, constricting vice. His thoughtless joke had initially sparked this entire chaotic mess, and now this kind, gentle woman was being relentlessly hounded and barraged by the voracious media. He thought back to their earlier conversation, how she had spoken so passionately about her patients with such genuine compassion, and how her eyes had lit up when discussing her unwavering faith, despite the heavy weight of her personal loss. Running a weary hand through his silver hair, Adriel made a firm decision. He would do everything within his considerable power to help Ava restore her tarnished reputation and regain her shattered privacy. Whether she ultimately accepted his help or not, he owed her that much. Picking up his phone, he began making a series of urgent calls, his confident CEO voice firmly in place. This increasingly untenable situation needed to be resolved quickly and decisively, and he had the extensive resources to make it happen. The evening news continued to play in the background, showing more and more footage of Ava's house, now completely surrounded by news vans and relentless reporters. Adriel's determination grew stronger with each passing moment. He would make this right somehow. He absolutely had to. The soft morning light filtered gently through Ava's small kitchen window, casting long, melancholy shadows across her countertop, where a formal termination letter now lay. She read it again, though the harsh words hadn't changed in the slightest. Due to the recent media disruption and its significant impact on our clinic's daily operations, we regret to inform you that your employment is hereby terminated, effective immediately. Her hands trembled as she carefully folded the cold, impersonal paper and slipped it into her purse. 23 long years of dedicated service ended with a single, devastating paragraph. The clinic's decision undoubtedly hurt, but she also understood their difficult position. The constant presence of intrusive news vans and aggressive photographers made it virtually impossible for patients to enter quietly and privately, or to maintain the privacy and dignity they so richly deserved. At precisely 10 o'clock, Ava walked slowly into the clinic one last time. Her supervisor, Nancy, couldn't quite meet her eyes directly as she handed over a plain cardboard box for Ava's personal items. "I'm so sorry it ended this way, Ava," Nancy murmured quietly, her voice full of regret. You're truly one of our best nurses, and we'll all miss you terribly. Ava managed a small, sad smile. Thank you for all the years, she said softly, beginning to slowly clear her desk. She packed carefully, gently wrapping the framed photos of her many patients, some now gone, others still bravely fighting their battles. Each face held a cherished story, a deep connection, a piece of her own heart. The small ceramic angel a terminal patient had lovingly given her last Christmas. The handmade cards from grateful families, expressing their sincere appreciation for her kindness and compassion. Years and years of precious memories all carefully fitting into one modest cardboard box. As she carried it slowly to her car, a reporter shouted her name loudly from across the street. Ava quickened her pace, slid gratefully into her car, and drove slowly home with tears blurring her vision. The afternoon sun was high in the sky when a sudden knock at her front door made her jump. Through the peephole she saw Adriel Trent standing patiently on her porch, looking both determined and slightly uncertain. He was wearing casual clothes today, casual khakis and a simple blue button-down shirt that somehow made him seem far more approachable and less intimidating than his usual corporate attire. Ava hesitated for only a brief moment, then unlocked and opened the door. "Mr. Trent, please call me Adriel," he said gently, then held up a cream-colored envelope. "May I come in for a few minutes? I have something very important to discuss with you." Ava glanced quickly at the ever-present news van still parked conspicuously down the street, then stepped aside to let him enter her small house. She led him to her modest living room, where the soft afternoon light streamed gently through the delicate lace curtains her mother had made so many years ago. "I heard about the clinic," Adriel said, settling carefully into the armchair. "I'm truly sorry, Ava. That should never have happened." Ava sat on her worn couch, smoothing her simple skirt. "News travels incredibly fast these days." "Too fast sometimes," he agreed. He leaned forward slightly, holding out the cream-colored envelope. "That's partly why I'm here. I have a proposition for you, a potential opportunity that I think you should seriously consider." Ava took the envelope carefully, opening it to find several neatly typed pages. As she read, her eyes widened slowly in surprise. It was an employment contract, formally offering her a position as a live-in nurse for Adriel's mother, Miriam Trent. "Your mother?" Ava looked up, clearly surprised. Adriel nodded. "Yes, she's 78 years old, and her health has been steadily declining over the past few months. She needs regular medical supervision and assistance, but she's incredibly stubborn and resistant about accepting any sort of help. When I witnessed how skillfully you handled our awkward coffee meeting, your quiet patience, your innate grace under that immense pressure, I honestly thought that you might be absolutely perfect for the position." Ava scanned the contract again, carefully noting the generous salary and comprehensive benefits package. "This is incredibly kind of you, Adriel, but I couldn't possibly." "It's not charity, Ava," Adriel interrupted firmly. "It's a genuine opportunity for both of us too. You need employment away from the media circus, and my mother needs someone with your skills and compassion." He paused, running a hand through his silver hair. "Besides, the guest house at the estate is completely private. No reporters can access the property." Eva stood walking to her window. The news van was still there, a constant reminder of how her life had changed. "I need time to think about this," she said quietly. "Of course." Adriel rose, placing his business card on her coffee table. "Take all the time you need, but please know the offer is genuine. My mother really does need help, and you're exactly the kind of person she needs." After he left, Eva spent hours reading and rereading the contract. The position seemed perfect, almost too perfect. She could continue her nursing work, help someone in need, and escape the media attention. But moving into a Adriel Trench estate, it felt overwhelming. That evening, Eva knelt beside her bed, as she had done every night since James passed. "Lord," she whispered, "I need your guidance. Is this the path you've chosen, or am I running away from my problems?" She prayed through the night, seeking clarity. As dawn broke, peace settled over her heart. The answer felt clear. This wasn't running away, but moving forward. Eva called Adriel's number early the next morning. When his secretary put her through, she said simply, "I accept the position." She could hear the smile in his voice. "I'm glad. When can you start?" "I can be ready by this evening if that's not too soon." "Perfect. I'll text you the address and gate code." The rest of the day passed in a blur of packing and preparation. Eva filled her car with essential items, leaving most of her furniture in her apartment. This was temporary, she reminded herself, just until things settled down and she found new work. As dusk approached, Eva followed her GPS up a winding road that hugged the shoreline of Lake Waverly. The gravel crunched beneath her tires as she turned onto a private drive marked Trent Estate. Tall pines lined the path, their branches creating patterns in the misty air. Through the gathering fog, she caught her first glimpse of the house. It stood 3 stories tall, its warm lights glowing through large windows, creating a welcoming beacon in the growing darkness. Stone and timber merged in elegant harmony, while carefully tended gardens surrounded the circular driveway, Eva parked near the front steps, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she took in her new temporary home. It was beautiful, intimidating, and completely foreign to her modest life. Yet somehow, as she watched the golden light spilling from the windows onto the misty grounds, she felt a strange sense of destiny. This unfamiliar world waited to test her spirit. But Eva Porter had faced greater challenges. With a deep breath, she stepped out of her car, ready to begin this new chapter, wherever it might lead. Eva stepped out of her car, smoothing her navy cardigan with trembling hands. Before she could reach for her overnight bag, the massive oak door swung open. A tall, elegant woman with silver-streaked hair stood in the entrance, her posture as straight as a ballerina's despite her age. This had to be Miriam Trent. "So, you're the one who crashed my son's friend's wedding?" Miriam said, her voice carrying both refinement and an unmistakable edge. Her eyes sharp as a hawk's traveled from Eva's sensible shoes to her simple hairstyle. Eva felt her cheeks warm. "Mrs. Trent," Mother Adriel's voice came from behind Miriam as he appeared in the doorway. "Ever is our guest now and our new nurse?" he added meaningfully. Miriam's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. "Well, come in then. The evening air isn't good for my arthritis." Eva followed them into a grand foyer with a sweeping staircase and crystal chandelier. The house was beautiful, but somehow felt hollow, as if it had forgotten how to be a home. "Let me show you to your room first," Adriel offered, but Eva shook her head. "If it's all right, I'd like to start work right away." "Mrs. Trent, when did you last take your evening medications?" Something flickered in Miriam's eyes. Surprise, perhaps respect. "Around 4 o'clock, I believe." "Then it's time for your evening dose. Would you like some tea with your pills? I noticed chamomile helps with nighttime medications." Miriam's stern expression softened slightly. Chamomile would be acceptable. Eva followed them into a spacious kitchen with gleaming granite countertops. While the water heated, she reviewed Miriam's medication schedule, organizing the evening pills with practice efficiency. Her hands moved automatically, finding comfort in the familiar routine. Earl Grey was Thomas's favorite. Miriam said suddenly, watching Eva prepare the tea. "My husband, he would drink it every evening on the terrace, watching the sunset over the lake." Eva placed the delicate china cup before Miriam. "Tell me about him." For the next hour, as the sky darkened outside, Miriam shared stories about Thomas. His love for sailing, his terrible singing voice, the way he proposed during a thunderstorm. Eva listened attentively, noting how Miriam's voice grew stronger with each memory shared. Adriel watched from the doorway, something unreadable in his expression. When their private chef served dinner, a light soup with fresh bread, he finally joined them at the table. "Thank you," he said quietly to Eva, as Miriam excused herself to rest. "I haven't heard Mother talk about Father so freely in years." "Sometimes people just need someone to listen," Eva replied, though she noticed how the shadows under his eyes seemed deeper in the dining room's soft lighting. After helping Miriam prepare for bed, Eva finally retreated to her assigned guest room. It was larger than her entire apartment, with a bay window overlooking the lake. The moon cast silver ribbons across the dark water, creating an almost magical scene. As she unpacked her small bag, movement caught her eye. On the balcony 1 floor below, Adriel stood alone, his hands thrust deep in his pockets. His shoulders carried a weight that had nothing to do with physical burden. Even from above, Eva could see the tension in his stance as he stared out at the water. The sight struck a chord deep within her. How many nights had she stood at her own window wearing that same posture of loss? The darkness may hide tears, but it couldn't disguise loneliness. "Lord," she whispered, moving away from the window, "please bring peace to this house, to all of us who carry grief like a shadow." She switched off the light, letting darkness and quiet settle around her. The bed was impossibly soft, the sheets carrying a fresh laundered scent she associated with luxury hotels. Yet sleep came surprisingly easily, perhaps because exhaustion had finally caught up with her. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the bay window and an unexpected sound. Laughter. Eva blinked awake, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling. The laughter came again, floating up from somewhere below. She dressed quickly in a comfortable blue dress and cardigan, following the sound and the rich aroma of coffee. In the kitchen she found a scene that stopped her in the doorway. Adriel sat at the breakfast nook with Miriam, both of them chuckling over something. A half-empty pot of coffee sat between them along with plates of pastries and fruit. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the silver in their hair and the genuine warmth in their smiles. "The coffee maker broke 3 times before I learned to use it properly," Adriel was saying, grinning at his mother. "And who taught you in the end?" Miriam asked, her eyes twinkling. "Maria from housekeeping," he admitted, "after I nearly electrocuted myself." Their shared laughter filled the kitchen again, and Eva felt something in her chest expand. It was more than just the lovely morning scene. It was the first real warmth she'd experienced since that fateful day at the chapel. Here, in this moment, the house didn't feel hollow anymore. Felt like it was remembering how to be a home. Miriam noticed her first. "Come join us. My son makes terrible coffee, but the pastries are quite good." "I heard that about the coffee," Eva said, smiling as she took the offered seat. "Good thing I know how to make a proper pot." "Oh," Adriel raised an eyebrow, his eyes dancing with amusement. "Is that a challenge to my coffee-making skills?" "Not at all," Eva replied innocently. "Just an observation from a professional caregiver who knows the importance of good coffee." Miriam laughed again, the sound bright and clear in the morning air. "I think I'm going to like having you here, Eva Porter." The warmth in the room seemed to grow stronger, wrapping around them like a comfortable blanket. Eva caught Adriel's eye across the table and saw her own gratitude reflected there. Sometimes the smallest moments, a shared laugh, a cup of coffee, a kind word, could begin to heal the deepest wounds. The mansion settled into a gentle rhythm over the next few days, like a heart learning to beat normally again. Eva found comfort in establishing routines that brought structure to the sprawling house. Each morning began with checking Miriam's vital signs and medications, followed by preparing a nutritious breakfast that filled the kitchen with inviting aromas. "This smells like my grandmother's kitchen," Miriam remarked one morning as Eva pulled fresh banana bread from the oven. "None of that fancy food our chef makes. Just honest cooking that feeds the soul." Eva smiled, setting the loaf to cool. "My mother always said food should tell a story of love. Even simple meals can bring people together." The days unfolded with quiet purpose. Eva noticed how the staff, the housekeeper, gardener, and chef seemed to relax around her, offering small smiles and conversation, where before they'd maintained careful distance. She learned their names, their stories, the little details that made them more than just employees. Miriam's health improved steadily under Eva's care. The older woman's color brightened, her appetite increased, and her sharp wit emerged more frequently. They spent afternoons in the sunroom, where Eva would listen to stories about Miriam's late husband, tales of their courtship, their struggles, their enduring love. He was brilliant in business, Miriam shared, fingering an old photograph. "But what I remember most is how he'd bring me wildflowers every Friday. Even in winter, he'd drive miles to find them, Sometimes I noticed how Adriel would linger in doorways during these conversations, his expression soft with memory. Though he spent most days in his study managing his company remotely, he began appearing more frequently at mealtimes. The formal dining room gave way to casual meals in the kitchen nook, where conversation flowed more easily. "You've changed things," he commented one evening as Eva served a simple but fragrant chicken pot pie. "The house feels different." "Different good or different concerning?" Eva asked, passing him the salt. "Good," he said quietly. "Very good." As days turned to evening, Eva often found herself drawn to the library, a magnificent room lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves and comfortable leather chairs. One particularly cool night, she entered to find Adriel sitting in the soft lamplight, holding what appeared to be old letters. He looked up, startled but not displeased. "I should warn you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "No one's been allowed in here for the past 3 years. This was Catherine's favorite room." Eva started to retreat, but he shook his head. "Please stay. Maybe it's time to let someone in." She settled into a chair across from him, the fireplace crackling between them. The letters in his hands were clearly well read, their edges softened with handling. "Catherine wrote these during our courtship," he explained, running a finger along the envelope's edge. "We were apart for 6 months while she studied in Europe. She wrote every week without fail." Eva watched as he carefully unfolded one letter, its paper thin with age. "She had beautiful handwriting," she observed softly. "She had beautiful everything." Adriel replied, his voice catching. "The doctors said it was quick, a brain aneurysm. One moment she was here planning a charity gala and the next." He trailed off, staring into the fire. Eva waited, letting silence create space for his grief. Finally, she spoke. "The hardest part for me was the empty side of the bed. Tom and I had this silly routine. He'd always kiss my forehead before turning out the light. For months after he passed, I couldn't bring myself to turn off the lamp." Adriel looked up, recognition in his eyes. "The little things," he agreed. "Catherine used to leave sticky notes everywhere, reminders, jokes, little drawings. I kept finding them months after. I think I still have every one." "I understand," Eva said gently. "When grief feels too heavy, faith was my only anchor. I'd pray not for the pain to stop, but for the strength to carry it." "Did it help?" he asked, genuinely curious. "It did, not right away, and not in the way I expected, but eventually I learned that grief is really just love with nowhere to go. Prayer gave it somewhere to flow." The fireplace popped and crackled, sending warm shadows dancing across the walls of books. From upstairs, they could hear Miriam's voice softly humming an old hymn, "Amazing Grace." The familiar melody floated down, wrapping around them like a comforting embrace. Adriel carefully folded the letter, returning it to its envelope. "Thank you," he said simply, but his eyes held volumes more. They sat in companionable silence, listening to Miriam's hymn and the quiet music of the fire. In that moment, the library felt less like a shrine to loss and more like a sanctuary for healing. The books around them stood witness to this small but significant change, this gentle opening of a door long closed. Eva watched the flames dance and felt the weight of the evening settle around them like a warm blanket. Sometimes she realized the most profound connections happen in silence, in the spaces between words where understanding flows without need for expression. Tonight, in this room that had held so much sorrow, something new was taking root, not to replace what was lost, but to honor it by growing forward. The hymn from upstairs faded into the night's quiet, but its echo remained in their hearts, a reminder that grace often comes in unexpected moments through unexpected people in unexpected places. The gentle rhythm of days flowed like the lake waters outside Eva's window, each sunrise bringing new moments of quiet discovery. The mansion's formal atmosphere gradually softened, warmed by shared meals and evening conversations that stretched long past sunset. Eva found herself developing a habit of brewing chamomile tea around 10 o'clock each night. More often than not, Adriel would appear in the kitchen doorway, drawn by the familiar whistle of the kettle. "I heard the siren call of your tea," he'd say, leaning against the counter with a gentle smile that reached his eyes. "You mean the kettle?" Ava would tease back, already reaching for a second mug. Their late-night conversations meandered through various topics: childhood memories, favorite books, funny stories about Miriam's stubborn independence. Ava discovered that beneath Adriel's CEO exterior lay a dry wit that matched her own. "Remember when you thought I was getting married?" he asked one night, eyes twinkling over his steaming mug. Eva groaned, but couldn't help laughing. "I'm never living that down, am I?" "Not a chance," he replied, chuckling. "Though I must say it was the most memorable wedding interruption I've ever witnessed. Your poor godson probably still has nightmares about random women bursting through chapel doors." These exchanges became treasured moments filled with quiet laughter and growing comfort in each other's presence. Miriam watched this development with shrewd eyes and a knowing smile. One afternoon, while Ava helped her sort through old photographs, the older woman paused over a picture of Adriel from years ago. "I haven't seen him smile like that in so long," Miriam mused, then fixed Eva with a direct look. "Not until you came along, dear. You make my son smile again." Eva felt her cheeks warm. "Mrs. Trent," Miriam, the older woman, corrected firmly. "And don't try to brush it off. I may be old, but I'm not blind. You've brought life back into this house." Before Eva could respond, Adriel appeared in the doorway. "Eva, I need to run some errands in town. Would you mind coming along? Mother's medication needs updating at the pharmacy." "Of course," Eva replied, grateful for the distraction from Miriam's knowing gaze. The drive into town was pleasant, filled with comfortable conversation and the warm autumn sunshine. Adriel parked near the main street, and they walked together toward the pharmacy, discussing Miriam's improving health. The attack came without warning: the sudden rush of footsteps, the harsh click of cameras, the barrage of shouted questions. "Mr. Trent, is this a romance with your wedding crasher? Miss Porter, was it all planned for attention? How long have you two been secretly dating?" Eva froze, her heart hammering as flashbulbs exploded around them. But before she could react, Adriel moved swiftly, positioning himself between her and the paparazzi. His hand found hers warm and steady as he guided her toward the nearest store entrance. "Inside," he murmured, his voice low and protective. "Don't answer them." The bell above the bookstore door chimed as they rushed in, the owner quickly pulling down the blinds to block the photographers. Eva realized she was trembling slightly, her hands still clasped in Otter's. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, mortified. "This is all because of me." Adriel's expression was fierce. "No, this is because some people have nothing better to do than harass others for profit." His thumb traced a gentle circle on the back of her hand, and Eva suddenly realized they were still holding on to each other. They both looked down at their joined hands, then slowly, reluctantly let go. They waited in the bookstore for nearly an hour, browsing shelves and making quiet conversation until the paparazzi dispersed. The owner, a kind, elderly man, brought them coffee and assured them the back exit would be clear when they were ready to leave. That evening, after dinner was cleared and Miriam had retired upstairs, Eva found Adriel in his study. "I wanted to thank you," she said softly, "for today, for protecting me like that." He looked up from his desk, his expression gentle but troubled. "You don't deserve any of this, Eva. None of it. Losing your job, being gouged by reporters, having your life turned upside down because of one misunderstanding." The way he looked at her made her breath catch. Concern and something deeper, something that made her pulse quicken. The air between them seemed to shift, charged with unspoken words and tender possibility. Later that night, Eva stood at her bedroom window, gazing out at the moonlit lake. Her hand still tingled where Adriel had held it, and her heart was doing strange things in her chest. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this way. This alive, this aware of every moment, this full of nervous energy and sweet anticipation. The reflection in the window showed her cheeks were flushed, and her eyes were bright with something that looked remarkably like hope. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, watching ripples of moonlight dance across the water below, and allowed herself to acknowledge the truth. Something was changing, something beautiful and frightening and wonderful all at once. The night air whispered through her open window, carrying the scent of late blooming jasmine from the garden below. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed midnight. But Ava felt more awake than ever, her heart pounding with the realization that life could still surprise her with new beginnings, even when she least expected them. Ava stood before the mirror in her room, hardly recognizing herself. The blue dress she'd borrowed from Miriam draped elegantly over her curves, its deep sapphire color making her eyes seem brighter, more alive. A week had passed since that day in town with Adriel, and now here she was preparing for his company's annual charity gala. "It's just for show," she whispered to her reflection, smoothing the silk fabric with trembling hands to quiet the rumors. But even as she said it, her heart fluttered traitorously. Earlier that week, Adriel had approached her in the garden, his manner almost shy. "Ava, I have a favor to ask," he'd said, watching her arrange fresh flowers for Miriam's room. "My company hosts an annual fundraiser, a gala for children's education. Would you consider attending with me?" When she'd hesitated, he'd quickly added, "It might help silence some of those persistent rumors if we appear together, showing there's nothing scandalous between us." His eyes had held hers for a moment too long, just as friends, of course. Now, as she fastened a simple pearl necklace, another loan from Miriam, Eva remembered how easily she'd said yes, despite her misgivings. A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Miriam. Instead, Adriel stood in the doorway, resplendent in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. His eyes widened slightly as he took in her appearance. "Ava," he breathed. "You look beautiful." She blushed, ducking her head. "It's Miriam's dress. She has excellent taste." "The dress is lovely," he agreed. "But that's not what I meant." He offered his arm. Shall we?" The drive to the Grand Waverly Hotel was quiet, filled with anticipation. Ava watched the city lights blur past her window, trying to calm her nerves. Adriel seemed to sense her anxiety, occasionally glancing at her with reassuring smiles. As they pulled up to the hotel entrance, Eva's breath caught. Crystal chandeliers spilled light onto the red carpet where photographers and well-dressed guests mingled. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. Adriel reached over and squeezed her hand. "You can. Just remember you're not alone this time." The moment they stepped out of the car, cameras began flashing. But true to his word, Adriel stayed close, his hand warm against her back as he guided her through the crowd. He fielded questions smoothly, introducing her simply as, "My dear friend, Eva Porter," to everyone they met. Inside the ballroom, hundreds of candles cast a golden glow over tables draped in white silk. Classical music drifted from a string quartet in the corner. Ava felt like she'd stepped into a fairy tale, complete with her very own. She caught herself before finishing that thought. Throughout dinner, Adriel kept her engaged in conversation, making sure she never felt out of place among the executives and socialites at their table. He shared little jokes with her between courses, making her laugh despite her nervousness. When the dancing began, Eva watched couples glide onto the floor, admiring their graceful movements. She jumped slightly when Adriel's hand appeared before her. "May I have this dance?" he asked softly. "I am not very good at this," she admitted. His eyes crinkled with warmth. "Neither am I. We can be terrible together." She laughed and took his hand, letting him lead her to the dance floor. The quartet was playing something slow and sweet, and Adriel drew her gently into his arms. "You need a break from that media circus?" Adriel stated, a proposition hanging in the air. "And my mother could really use someone with your skills and your kind heart." He paused, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair, the silver strands catching the light. "Besides," he continued, "the guest house on the estate is completely separate. No reporters can even get onto the property." Eva turned and walked to the window, her gaze drawn to the news van still parked down the street. It was a constant, unwelcome reminder of how drastically her life had been altered. "I need some time to think about this," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," Adriel replied, rising from his seat. He placed his business card on her coffee table, the gesture both professional and considerate. Take all the time you need, Eva, but please know that this offer is sincere. My mother genuinely needs help, and you're exactly the kind of person she needs. After Adriel had departed, Eva found herself lost in the fine print of the contract for hours. She read and reread each clause, each stipulation. On paper, the position seemed ideal, almost too good to be true. She could continue her work as a nurse, a profession she loved, help someone who was in need, and, perhaps most importantly, escape the relentless glare of the media. But the idea of moving into the sprawling Trent estate, a place so different from her own modest life, felt overwhelming, even daunting. That evening, Eva knelt beside her bed, a ritual she had observed every night since James's passing. The familiar ache of loss settled around her like a heavy cloak. Lord, she whispered into the quiet room, I need your guidance. Show me the way. Is this new opportunity the path you've chosen for me? Or am I simply running away from my problems, trying to escape the pain? She spent much of the night in prayer, seeking clarity, searching for a sign. As dawn painted the sky with soft hues of pink and gold, a sense of peace settled over her, calming the turmoil in her heart. The answer, she realized, was clear. This wasn't about running away. It was about taking a step forward, about embracing a new chapter in her life. Without hesitation, Eva dialed Adriel's number early the next morning. When his secretary connected her, she simply stated, I accept the position. She could practically hear the smile in his voice as he responded, That's wonderful, Eva. I'm so glad. When would you be able to start? Mother would be thrilled if you could come as soon as possible. I could be ready by this evening if that's not too soon, Eva offered, a sense of purpose filling her. Perfect, Adriel replied. I'll text you the address and the gate code right away. The rest of the day unfolded in a whirlwind of packing and preparation. Eva filled her car with the essentials, leaving most of her furniture behind in her apartment. This is just temporary, she reminded herself, clinging to the hope that things would eventually settle down and she could find a new job, a new normal. As dusk descended, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Eva followed her GPS up a winding road that hugged the picturesque shoreline of Lake Waverly. The sound of gravel crunching beneath her tires filled the air as she turned onto a private drive marked with an elegant sign, Trent Estate. Towering pine trees lined the long driveway, their branches intertwining to create intricate patterns in the misty air. Through the gathering fog, she caught her first glimpse of the house. It stood 3 stories tall, a magnificent structure of stone and timber. Warm lights glowed from the large windows, casting a welcoming beacon in the growing darkness. Carefully manicured gardens surrounded the circular driveway. Eva parked near the front steps, her hands gripping the steering wheel, her heart pounding in her chest. She gazed at her new, temporary home, taking in its beauty and its intimidating grandeur. It was a world away from her modest life, a place she never imagined she would find herself. Yet, as she watched the golden light spilling from the windows onto the misty grounds, a strange sense of destiny washed over her. It was as if this unfamiliar world was waiting to test her spirit, to challenge her in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. But Eva Porter had faced far greater challenges in her life. Taking a deep, fortifying breath, she stepped out of her car, ready to begin this new chapter, wherever it might lead. She smoothed her navy blue cardigan, her hands trembling slightly with a mix of apprehension and excitement. Before she could reach for her overnight bag, the massive oak front door swung open with a quiet groan. A tall, elegant woman with silver-streaked hair stood in the entrance, her posture as straight as a ballerina's, defying her age. There was no doubt in Ava's mind. This had to be Miriam Trent. So, you're the one who crashed my son's friend's wedding? Miriam stated, her voice laced with both refinement and a sharp, unmistakable edge. Her eyes, as sharp as a hawk's, scanned Ava from her sensible shoes to her simple hairstyle, missing nothing. Ava felt a flush rise to her cheeks, heat prickling her skin. Mrs. Trent, Mother, Adriel's voice interrupted, coming from behind Miriam as he appeared in the doorway. Eva is our guest now, and our new nurse. He added the last part with a meaningful glance at his mother. Miriam's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly, a silent acknowledgement. Well, come in then, she said, stepping back from the doorway. The evening air isn't good for my arthritis. Eva followed them into a grand foyer, complete with a sweeping staircase and a dazzling crystal chandelier that sparkled like 1,000 stars. The house was undeniably beautiful, a testament to wealth and privilege, but it felt strangely hollow, as if it had forgotten how to be a home, a place filled with warmth and laughter. Let me show you to your room first, Adriel offered, his voice gentle. But Eva shook her head, eager to get started. If it's all right with you, I'd like to start working right away. Mrs. Trent, when did you last take your evening medications? Something flickered in Miriam's eyes, surprise, perhaps even a hint of respect. Around 4 o'clock, I believe. Then it's time for your evening dose, Eva stated matter-of-factly. Would you like some tea with your pills? I've noticed that chamomile helps with nighttime medications. Miriam's stern expression softened ever so slightly. Chamomile would be acceptable, she conceded. Eva followed them into a spacious kitchen, gleaming with granite countertops and high-end appliances. While the water heated in an electric kettle, she reviewed Miriam's medication schedule, organizing the pills with practiced efficiency. Her hands moved automatically, finding a strange sense of comfort in the familiar routine. Earl Grey was Thomas's favorite, Miriam said suddenly, watching Eva as she prepared the tea. My husband. He would drink it every evening on the terrace, watching the sunset over the lake. Eva placed the delicate china cup before Miriam, her gaze compassionate. Tell me about him, she encouraged. And so, for the next hour, as the sky outside deepened into velvety darkness, Miriam shared stories about Thomas, her late husband. She spoke of his love for sailing, his terrible singing voice that always made her laugh, and the way he proposed during a thunderstorm, getting down on one knee in the pouring rain. Eva listened attentively, her heart open to Miriam's memories. She noticed how the older woman's voice grew stronger, more vibrant, with each story she shared, as if the act of remembering was breathing life back into her. Adriel watched from the doorway, his expression unreadable in the soft light. When their private chef served dinner, a light soup with crusty bread, he finally joined them at the table. Thank you, he said quietly to Eva, his gratitude evident, as Miriam excused herself to retire for the evening. I haven't heard Mother talk about Father so freely in years. Sometimes, Eva replied softly, people just need someone to listen. Though she couldn't help but notice how the shadows under his eyes seemed deeper, more pronounced, in the dining room's dim lighting. After helping Miriam prepare for bed, ensuring she was comfortable and settled, Eva finally retreated to her assigned guest room. It was far larger than her entire apartment, a lavish space with a bay window that offered a breathtaking view of the lake. The moonlight cast silver ribbons across the dark water, creating an almost magical scene. As she unpacked her small bag, a fleeting movement caught her eye. She glanced down at the balcony 1 floor below and saw Adriel standing alone, his hands thrust deep into his pockets. His shoulders were slumped, bearing a weight that had nothing to do with physical burden. Even from above, Eva could sense the tension radiating from his stance as he stared out at the water. The sight struck a chord deep within her. How many nights had she stood at her own window, wearing that same posture of loss, that same air of quiet desperation? The darkness may hide tears, but it couldn't disguise loneliness. Lord, she whispered, moving away from the window, please bring peace to this house, to all of us who carry grief like a shadow. She switched off the light, plunging the room into darkness and allowing the quiet to settle around her. The bed was impossibly soft, the sheets carrying the crisp, fresh-laundered scent she associated with luxury hotels. Yet, sleep came surprisingly easily, perhaps because exhaustion had finally caught up with her. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the bay window and an unexpected sound. Laughter. Eva blinked awake, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling. The laughter came again, a cheerful melody floating up from somewhere below. She dressed quickly in a comfortable blue dress and a warm cardigan, following the sound and the enticing aroma of freshly brewed coffee. In the kitchen, she found a scene that stopped her in the doorway, a tableau of warmth and connection that she hadn't expected. Adrielle sat at the breakfast nook with Miriam, both of them chuckling over something. A half-empty coffee pot sat between them, along with plates piled high with pastries and fresh fruit. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the silver in their hair and illuminating the genuine warmth in their smiles. The coffee maker broke down 3 times before I finally learned how to use it properly, Adrielle was saying, grinning at his mother. And who taught you in the end? Miriam asked, her eyes twinkling with amusement. Maria from housekeeping, he admitted sheepishly. After I nearly electrocuted myself, their shared laughter filled the kitchen again, and Eva felt something in her chest expand, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. It was more than just the lovely morning scene, more than just the pleasant atmosphere. It was the first real warmth she had felt since that fateful day at the chapel, the day her life had irrevocably changed. Here, in this moment, the house didn't feel hollow anymore. It felt like it was remembering how to be a home, a place of connection and joy. Miriam noticed her standing in the doorway first. Ava, come join us, she called out, her voice welcoming. My son makes terrible coffee, but the pastries are quite good. I heard about the coffee, Ava said, smiling as she took the offered seat at the breakfast nook. Good thing I know how to make a proper pot. Adrielle raised an eyebrow, his eyes dancing with amusement. Oh, is that a challenge to my coffee-making skills? Not at all, Ava replied innocently, a playful glint in her eyes. Just an observation from a professional caregiver who knows the importance of good coffee. Miriam laughed again, the sound bright and clear in the morning air. I think I'm going to like having you here, Ava Porter, she declared, her gaze genuine and affectionate. The warmth in the room seemed to grow stronger, wrapping around them like a comfortable blanket. Eva caught Adrielle's eye across the table and saw her own gratitude reflected there. Sometimes, she realized, the smallest moments, a shared laugh, a cup of coffee, a kind word, could begin to heal the deepest wounds, to mend the broken pieces of a heart. The mansion settled into a gentle rhythm over the next few days, like a heart learning to beat normally again after a long illness. Eva found comfort in establishing routines that brought structure and order to the sprawling house. Each morning began with checking Miriam's vital signs and administering her medications, followed by preparing a nutritious and delicious breakfast that filled the kitchen with inviting aromas. This smells just like my grandmother's kitchen, Miriam remarked one morning as Eva pulled a loaf of fresh banana bread from the oven. None of that fancy food our chef makes, just honest cooking that feeds the soul. Eva smiled, setting the loaf on a wire rack to cool. My mother always said that food should tell a story of love, she explained. Even the simplest meals can bring people together. The days unfolded with a quiet sense of purpose. Ava noticed how the staff, the housekeeper, the gardener, the chef, seemed to relax around her, offering small smiles and snippets of conversation where before they had maintained a careful distance, almost as if afraid to intrude on the Trent family's grief. She made an effort to learn their names, to hear their stories, to discover the little details that made them more than just employees. Miriam's health improved steadily under Ava's care. The older woman's complexion brightened, her appetite increased, and her sharp wit emerged more frequently, peppering their conversations with dry humor and astute observations. They spent afternoons in the sunroom, bathed in the warm glow of the sun, where Eva would listen to stories about Miriam's late husband, Thomas, tales of their courtship, their struggles, and their enduring love. He was brilliant in business, Miriam shared one afternoon, fingering an old photograph of Thomas. But what I remember most is how he would bring me wildflowers every Friday, even in the dead of winter. He would drive miles and miles to find them. Ava sometimes noticed how Adrielle would linger in the doorways during these conversations. His expression softened with a mixture of sadness and fondness. Though he spent most of his days in his study, managing his company remotely, he began appearing more frequently at mealtimes, drawn by the warmth and companionship that Eva had brought to the house. The formal dining room, once used only for special occasions, gradually gave way to casual meals in the kitchen nook, where conversation flowed more easily and laughter echoed through the halls. "You've changed things," Adrielle commented one evening as Eva served a simple but fragrant chicken pot pie, a dish that reminded him of his childhood. "The house feels." His hand settled respectfully at her waist, while hers rested on his shoulder. As they began to move, the world seemed to fade away around them. Eva found herself lost in Adrielle's eyes, forgetting about the cameras, the whispers, everything but the way he held her, like she was something precious. "You know," he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear, "I've been thinking about that day you burst into the chapel. Must we remember that?" Eva groaned softly. His lips twitched. "Maybe you were at the right wedding after all." Their laughter mingled softly in the space between them. But there was something meaningful in his words that made Eva's heart skip a beat. She noticed how his hand had tightened slightly on her waist, how his eyes held a warmth that had nothing to do with friendship. They danced through 3 more songs before Eva needed a break. Adrielle led her to a quiet balcony overlooking the hotel's gardens, where the cool night air helped calm her flushed cheeks. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for making this evening so much easier than I expected." "Thank you for coming," he replied. "It wouldn't have been nearly as enjoyable without you." When it was time to leave, Adrielle helped her into her wrap, his fingers brushing her shoulders in a way that sent shivers down her spine. At the car, their hands touched as he opened her door, lingering for just a moment too long. Eva felt that touch all the way home. They arrived back at the house to find lights still on in the kitchen. Miriam sat at the table, 3 steaming mugs of cocoa arranged before her. "I thought you might like something warm before bed," she said innocently, but her eyes sparkled with knowing amusement as she took in their formal attire and Ava's glowing cheeks. "Don't look at me like that," Eva protested with a laugh, sinking into a chair. "Like what, dear?" Miriam asked, the picture of innocence. "I'm simply enjoying my cocoa and the company of 2 people who look remarkably happy this evening." Eva caught Adrielle's eye across the table and quickly looked down at her mug, but she couldn't hide her smile. Her heart was full of something warm and bright, something that felt dangerously like possibility. They sat together in the kitchen, sipping cocoa, and sharing quiet conversation about the evening. Eva noticed how Adrielle's eyes kept finding hers, how his smile seemed softer than usual. Miriam watched them both with maternal satisfaction, occasionally hiding her knowing smirks behind her mug. When Eva finally headed upstairs to her room, she carried with her the memory of Adrielle's arms around her as they danced, the warmth of his hand in hers, and the way he'd looked at her under the glittering lights of the ballroom. She carefully hung Miriam's blue dress in her closet, running her fingers over the silk one last time. The night had been perfect. More than perfect. It had been real. Eva woke to golden sunlight streaming through her window, still wrapped in the magical feeling from the previous night. She stretched contentedly, remembering how it felt to dance in Adrielle's arms. But when she reached for her phone to check the time, her peaceful morning shattered. Dozens of notifications lit up her screen. Messages, voicemails, and news alerts flooded in. Her hands trembled as she opened the first link, and her heart dropped. Widowed CEO in love with the wedding crasher. Publicity stunt confirmed. The headline screamed across her screen in bold letters, accompanied by photos from the gala. There she was, dancing with Adrielle, his hand on her waist, both of them smiling. In any other context, the pictures would have been beautiful. Now they felt like evidence in a prosecution. Eva scrolled frantically through the article, her chest tightening with each paragraph. Anonymous sources claimed she had orchestrated everything, from the wedding interruption to her current position in the Trent household. They painted her as a calculating social climber who had manipulated a grieving widower for fame and fortune. Ms. Porter strategically targeted Mr. Trent, one unnamed source claimed. The viral video was just the beginning of her plan to infiltrate his life and company. Another article quoted a close friend of Adrielle's. "He's not thinking clearly. This woman has taken advantage of his kindness and vulnerability. The board is rightfully concerned. Ava's phone buzzed with a text from her sister. Are you okay? It's all over the news. Before she could reply, she heard a car door slam outside. Rushing to the window, she saw Adriel's black sedan in the driveway. His normally perfect posture was rigid with tension as he strode towards the house. Ava hurried downstairs, still in her nightgown with a robe hastily thrown over it. She found Miriam in the kitchen, looking worried as she watched the news on her tablet. "Oh, Ava," Miriam said softly. "What horrible things they're saying." The front door opened with such force it rattled the pictures on the walls. Adriel stormed in, his tie loosened and his silver hair disheveled. He looked exhausted and furious. "The board suspended me," he announced without preamble, "pending investigation into improper conduct and potential manipulation of company image for personal gain." "Adriel, I'm so sorry." Ava started. "I never spoke to any reporters. I would never. There are protesters outside headquarters." He cut her off, pacing the kitchen. "Accusing me of exploiting you for publicity, or you of exploiting me, depends which side you ask. My PR team can't control the narrative. Stocks are dropping. Partners are threatening to pull out. Son." Miriam tried to interject, but Adriel wasn't finished. 25 years, he said, his voice rough. 25 years building this company. My reputation. Everything I've worked for is being questioned because... He stopped abruptly, running a hand through his hair. Ava felt sick. "Because of me," she finished quietly. His silence was answer enough. "Maybe you didn't talk to the press," he finally said, not meeting her eyes. "But your presence here, it's costing everything I've built." The words hit Ava like physical blows. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold in the pain. Just hours ago, they had been dancing, laughing, sharing something that felt like possibility. Now it lay in ruins at their feet. "I understand," she whispered. She turned to Miriam, who looked heartbroken. "I'll pack my things." "Ava, wait," Miriam called, but Ava was already heading upstairs, tears threatening to fall. In her room, Ava moved mechanically, folding clothes and gathering belongings. She could hear Miriam and Adriel arguing downstairs, their voices rising and falling like waves. She tried not to listen, focusing instead on packing everything she'd accumulated during her weeks there. The blue dress from the gala hung in her closet like a reminder of everything that could have been. She carefully returned it to Miriam's room, smoothing the fabric one last time. Evening fell, and Adriel retreated to his study for emergency conference calls. Ava heard him talking late into the night, his voice tight with controlled frustration as he tried to salvage his company's reputation. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, when the house was silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, Ava carried her bags downstairs. She placed them by the door, then went to the kitchen to write her goodbye. Her hand shook as she put pen to paper. "Dear Miriam and Adriel, thank you for opening your home to me when I needed it most. Miriam, you've become more than a patient. You're a dear friend, and I'll miss our talks and your wisdom. Adriel, please take care of yourself. I never meant to cause such chaos in your life. I'm grateful for your kindness and protection, but I understand why it has to end. I hope in time your life and work return to normal. With deepest gratitude, Ava." She placed the letter on the kitchen counter where they would find it in the morning. For a moment she stood in the quiet kitchen, remembering all the meals shared there, the laughter, the growing warmth between them all. The sky was just beginning to lighten as Ava loaded her car. She took one last look at the house, its windows dark except for Adriel's study. Even now, he was working to fix the damage her presence had caused. As she drove down the long gravel driveway, tears finally spilled down her cheeks. The morning sun, usually so hopeful, felt like it was mocking her as it blurred through her tears. She had no destination in mind, just away from the chaos she'd caused, away from the pain in Adriel's voice, away from another chance at love that had slipped through her fingers like morning mist. The headlines would probably continue, but at least now they would show her leaving. Maybe that would help Adriel salvage what remained of his reputation. Maybe that would be enough. Ava merged onto the highway just as dawn broke fully over the horizon, leaving behind the lakeside house and all its broken promises. She didn't allow herself to look back. Morning light filtered through the kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the marble countertop where Adriel's coffee sat untouched. His eyes were fixed on Ava's letter, reading it for the third time as the words burned into his memory. The paper trembled slightly in his hands. Miriam entered the kitchen, her steps slower than usual. She took one look at her son's face and knew. She's gone, isn't she? Adriel nodded, passing her the letter without a word. The silence stretched between them as Miriam read, her expression growing more troubled with each line. You let fear chase away grace, Miriam finally said, her voice heavy with disappointment. She placed the letter back on the counter with deliberate care. Just like your father used to do when things got difficult. Mother. Adriel started, but Miriam held up her hand. No, you listen to me, Adriel Trent. That woman brought light back into this house. For the first time since Caroline passed, there was laughter here. Real laughter. She settled into a chair at the kitchen table, her movements stiff with age and emotion. And you threw it away because of what? Some headlines? Stock prices? It's not that simple, Adriel defended, but his voice lacked conviction. The company will survive, Miriam cut in. But will you? Will your heart? Across town, Ava was unlocking the door to a small apartment she'd managed to rent near her old neighborhood. The space was nothing like the lakeside mansion, just a basic one-bedroom with worn carpet and dated wallpaper. But it was all she could afford on such short notice. She set down her bags and opened the blinds, letting in the morning light. The view was of a brick wall, not the sparkling lake she'd grown accustomed to, but she pushed that thought away. This was home now. This was starting over. Within days, Ava threw herself back into what she knew best, caring for others. She contacted her old hospice and offered to volunteer with their music therapy program. The coordinator welcomed her warmly, remembering her dedication from before the viral video incident. The first morning, as she walked into the hospice, guitar case in hand, something in her chest loosened. Here, among the patients and their families, nobody cared about viral videos or CEO scandals. They only cared about the comfort her music brought. She sat with Martha, a 78-year-old patient with advanced cancer, playing soft hymns while the woman dozed. Then with James, a former music teacher battling ALS, who smiled with his eyes as she played his favorite Beatles songs. The work filled her days with purpose, even as her nights remained hollow. Often, in quiet moments between patients, memories would surface unbidden. Miriam's sharp wit softening over evening tea, Adriel's rare but genuine laugh echoing across the dinner table, the way his hand had felt steady and warm against her back as they danced at the gala. She would push these thoughts away, focus on her music, on her patients, on putting one foot in front of the other. Meanwhile, at his office overlooking the city, Adriel was buried in paperwork. He'd thrown himself into investigating the fraud allegations, determined to clear both their names. His assistant had compiled boxes of financial records from his late wife, Caroline's charitable foundation, dating back years before her death. Night after night, he pored over transaction histories, donor lists, and tax returns. The numbers began to blur together, but something kept nagging at him, a pattern he couldn't quite grasp. It was past midnight when he finally saw it. A series of donations, supposedly from Ava's late husband's accounts, didn't match the foundation's actual bank records. He dug deeper, tracing the money trail backward, and discovered a shocking truth. The fraudulent transactions had been orchestrated by Thomas Warner, Caroline's former business partner. Adriel sat back in his chair, stunned. Warner had been like family. He'd even spoken at Caroline's funeral. But the evidence was clear. Warner had been embezzling from the foundation for years, using various accounts to hide the money, including some linked to Ava's deceased husband. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Ava had been innocent all along. While he'd been letting doubt poison his trust, she'd been carrying the weight of false accusations. And instead of standing by her, he'd let his fears drive her away. He grabbed his phone, scrolling to Ava's number, but stopped short of calling. A simple phone call couldn't fix this. He needed to make things right, truly right. First, he had to expose Warner's fraud and clear Ava's name publicly. Adriel worked through the night, compiling evidence and preparing documentation for his legal team. As dawn approached, he stood at his office window, watching the city wake up. Somewhere out there, Ava was starting her day, probably heading to the hospice, where he knew she'd been volunteering. He'd had his assistant keep tabs on her, not to interfere, but to make sure she was okay. The morning sun caught the lake in the distance, making it sparkle like it had on all those mornings they'd shared coffee on the terrace. He realized with sudden clarity that he wasn't just fighting to clear her name anymore. He was fighting to win her back, to prove that he could be worthy of the grace she'd brought into his life. He turned back to his desk, determined. The evidence was there. Warner's fraud would be exposed. Ava's reputation would be restored. But would it be enough? Would she forgive him for doubting her? For letting fear overwhelm what they'd begun to build? He thought of his mother's words. You let fear chase away grace. She was right. Of course, she usually was. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to chase grace back. The sun climbed higher over the city as Adriel gathered his files, preparing to meet with his lawyers. Each document he collected was another step toward the truth, another chance to make things right. Not just for his company or his reputation, but for Ava, for the possibility of love he'd been too afraid to embrace. The autumn breeze rustled through the hospice courtyard's maple trees, scattering golden leaves across the worn brick pathways. Ava sat on a weathered wooden bench, her fingers moving gently across the strings of an old guitar. The instrument had seen better days, its finish dulled by years of use, but the sound it produced was warm and pure. Her patient, Robert, lay back in his wheelchair with closed eyes, a peaceful smile on his weathered face, as Ava played Amazing Grace. The familiar hymn drifted through the courtyard, mingling with the soft whisper of falling leaves and distant birdsong. She was halfway through the second verse when movement at the courtyard entrance caught her eye. Her fingers froze on the strings, the melody dying mid-note. There, standing beneath the stone archway, was Adriel Trent. He looked different than she remembered, more tired perhaps, with his silver hair slightly disheveled and dark circles under his eyes. His usual impeccable suit was replaced by a simple sweater and slacks, but his gaze, when it met hers, held the same intensity that had always made her heart skip. Please, Robert whispered, his eyes still closed. Don't stop playing. Ava forced her trembling fingers back to the strings, though she could barely remember the notes. Adriel remained by the archway, waiting respectfully as she finished the hymn. Each second felt like an eternity, her awareness split between the music and his presence. When the last note faded, Robert opened his eyes and smiled. Thank you, Miss Ava. That was beautiful as always. A nurse appeared to will Robert back inside, leaving Ava alone with Adriel in the quiet courtyard. She carefully placed the guitar in its case, using the familiar motions to steady her nerves. Adriel stepped closer, his shoes crunching softly on scattered leaves. You still play beautifully, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I remember hearing you practice late at night when you thought everyone was asleep. Ava's hands stilled on the guitar case latches. Why are you here, Adriel? He moved to the bench, maintaining a careful distance. Because I owe you the truth, and an apology that's long overdue. She finally looked up at him fully, noting the exhaustion in his face, the way his shoulders carried a weight she hadn't seen before. The truth about what? Everything. He pulled a folder from his messenger bag. 2 weeks ago, I discovered who really orchestrated the fraud. Thomas Warner, Caroline's former business partner. He'd been embezzling from the foundation for years, using various accounts as cover, including some linked to your late husband's name. Ava's breath caught. What? Adriel opened the folder, showing her documents filled with highlighted transactions and annotated bank records. He created a perfect paper trail to implicate innocent people if anyone ever started asking questions. The official retraction was published this morning in every major newspaper. He handed her a newspaper clipping. Your name has been completely cleared. Tears blurred Ava's vision as she scanned the headline. Tech CEO uncovers $1 million fraud. Wedding crasher incident revealed as unrelated. The article detailed Warner's scheme and explicitly stated that both Ava Porter and her late husband had been falsely implicated. I was wrong. Adriel continued, his voice trembling. So terribly wrong to doubt you, to let fear and suspicion poison what we were building. You were right to walk away. Ava wiped her eyes with shaking hands. I didn't want to be right. I wanted to be wrong about all of it. About having to leave. About us being too broken to... We're not broken, he interrupted gently. At least not anymore. He shifted closer on the bench, though still not touching her. These past weeks without you, I've realized something, Ava. I can't walk without you anymore. The house is empty. The music is gone. Even Mother misses your terrible jokes. A wet laugh escaped Ava's lips. My jokes aren't terrible. They're awful. He smiled, then grew serious again. But they made us laugh. You made us live again, Ava. You brought light back into our home, and I was too blind with fear to protect it. Ava set the newspaper aside, her heart aching with the weight of possibility and fear. Adriel, what if we're just two broken people clinging to each other? What if that's all this is? He shook his head, and his hand moved as if to take hers before stopping just short. No, Ava, we're two healed hearts that finally met in the right place. Maybe that's what all this was about. Not just a wrong door, but a right moment, a chance to find grace again together. The autumn breeze swirled around them, carrying the sweet scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. Ava stared at their almost touching hands on the bench between them, remembering all the quiet moments, the shared laughter, the gradual warming of frozen hearts. She thought of Miriam's knowing smiles, of late-night conversations over tea, of the way music had filled the empty spaces in that big house by the lake. She didn't answer him. Not yet, but she didn't turn away either. Instead, she stayed there in that moment of possibility, feeling the warmth of his presence beside her, listening to the whisper of falling leaves and the distant echo of hope. The autumn days settled into a gentle rhythm. Every morning, like clockwork, Adriel's silver Tesla would quietly pull into the hospice parking lot. He never made a fuss about his arrival, simply appearing with 2 cups of coffee from the local cafe, one black for himself, and one with a splash of cream for Ava. The staff quickly grew accustomed to his presence. He wasn't the commanding CEO here, just a man in rolled-up sleeves, helping wherever he could. He'd carry supplies, organize paperwork, or simply sit with patients who needed company while Ava attended to others. You don't have to do this, Ava told him one Tuesday morning as they walked the sunlit corridor together. I know you have a company to run. Adriel smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. The board insisted I take some personal time. Besides, I'm learning more here than I ever did in the boardroom. They fell into an easy routine of sharing lunch in the hospital cafeteria. The food wasn't fancy, nothing like the gourmet meals they'd shared at the lake house. But somehow the simple sandwiches and soup tasted better when shared across a small table in comfortable silence. Sometimes they'd talk about the patients, sharing stories of courage and grace they witnessed daily. Other times they'd just sit quietly, watching the autumn leaves dance past the windows. The weight of their past misunderstandings gradually lifted with each shared meal, each small kindness, each moment of quiet understanding. During patient rounds, Adriel would often trail behind Ava, watching her work with quiet admiration. Her gentle way with the terminally ill touched something deep in his soul. She had a gift for finding joy in the midst of sorrow, for bringing light into dark places. You remind me of my Caroline sometimes, he said one afternoon as they walked between rooms. She had that same ability to make people feel seen, truly seen. Ava paused, touched by the comparison. Tell me about her. For the first time, Adriel spoke freely about his late wife, not with the heavy grief of before, but with gentle remembrance. They talked while checking supplies, their conversation flowing naturally between past and present. The chapel became their sanctuary during quiet moments. Sometimes they'd find each other there during breaks, sitting in comfortable silence in the warm light filtering through the stained glass. Ava would often hear Adrielle's whispered prayers, no longer filled with anger or confusion, but with gratitude and hope. Every few days, a package would arrive from Miriam, always containing homemade cookies wrapped in wax paper and a handwritten note. "The house misses your voice," one read. Another simply said, "Come home soon." With a small heart drawn in the corner, Ava kept every note tucked safely in her locker. Each one felt like a thread pulling her back towards the lake, toward the place where her heart had begun to heal. The days grew shorter, and autumn painted the world in rich golds and deep reds. One evening, as Ava was wrapping up her shift, Adriel materialized in her office doorway. "Join us for dinner tonight," he suggested in a gentle tone. "Mom's whipping up her legendary vegetable soup, and trust me, she won't take no for an answer." Ava glanced up from the stack of paperwork, not just acknowledging Adriel's invitation but everything it symbolized. Forgiveness, renewed hope, a world of possibilities. "Just dinner?" she inquired cautiously. "Just dinner," he confirmed with a reassuring nod. "Although I can't promise Mom won't try to convince you to stick around permanently." The drive out to Lake Waverly was incredibly serene, with the setting sun casting a breathtaking array of amber and rose hues across the water. Ava's pulse quickened as they turned onto the familiar gravel road, the house gradually appearing through the trees like a comforting lighthouse. Miriam was already waiting at the entrance, her face beaming as she caught sight of Ava. Without a second thought, she enveloped Ava in a warm, heartfelt hug. "Welcome home, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The house felt exactly as she remembered it, yet somehow cozier, as if it had been patiently anticipating her return. The familiar aroma of freshly baked bread and herb-infused soup wafted from the kitchen. They gathered around the weathered oak table, where a simple but inviting meal was set out. Crusty bread, steaming bowls of vegetable soup, and a dainty vase filled with late autumn wildflowers. "I hope you don't mind the simplicity," Miriam said as she passed around the bread basket. "I've come to realize that sometimes the simplest things carry the most profound meaning." Ava broke off a piece of the warm bread, inhaling its comforting scent. "It's perfect," she said softly. "Absolutely perfect." They ate at a leisurely pace, sharing stories and exchanging gentle laughter. The palpable tension that had characterized their last meal together had vanished, replaced by something more tender, more authentic. Miriam entertained them with anecdotes from her younger days, her eyes sparkling with mischief. As Ava assisted with clearing the dishes, Miriam gently touched her arm. "You know," she began, "I really need to thank you." "Thank me? For what?" Miriam's eyes welled up with tears. "For bringing faith back into this house. We had forgotten how to pray, how to hold on to hope. You reminded us." Ava felt tears stinging her own eyes. "I think God was always here," she replied. "Sometimes we just need a little help remembering where to look." A soft chuckle escaped Miriam's lips. "Well, he certainly knew what he was doing when he sent you through that wrong door." Ava glanced towards the living room, where Adriel was building a fire in the hearth. The warm glow illuminated his face, revealing a softer side she'd never witnessed before. She realized with sudden clarity that maybe she had never truly left this place. Not in her heart, where it truly mattered. The evening unfolded around them like a cozy blanket, filled with quiet moments and easygoing conversation. As they sat together in the firelight, sipping tea and watching the flames dance, Ava felt a sense of peace settle over her soul. A peace she'd been searching for without even realizing it. She hadn't yet given Adriel an answer, hadn't made any commitments about the future. But sitting there in the comforting glow of family and restored faith, she understood that some answers don't require words. They simply need time, trust, and the courage to allow love to mend what was broken. The autumn morning dawned crisp and clear, with sunlight streaming through the remaining leaves on the trees. Ava stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her simple cream-colored dress. A text message from Adriel had arrived earlier. "Wear something nice. Small church event this afternoon. Nothing fancy." Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Miriam. "Darling, Could you pick up some flowers on your way? Any kind will do. The request seemed oddly casual for Miriam, who usually had very specific preferences about everything. Ava stopped at the local flower shop, selecting a bouquet of mixed blooms that evoked the feeling of early fall. Warm oranges, deep purples, and soft whites. The florist carefully wrapped them, a knowing smile playing on her lips. Ava drove toward St. Matthew's Chapel, memories of that first day flooding back. The panic, the embarrassment, the way her entire world had shifted in an instant. She hadn't been back since then, always choosing to attend services at her old church closer to town. The gravel crunched beneath her tires as she pulled into the parking lot. Something felt different. The usual scattering of cars for a small church event was missing. Instead, she recognized vehicles belonging to the hospice staff, some of Adrielle's employees, and even her former colleagues from the clinic. Her heart began to race. The chapel doors were closed, but delicate white ribbons adorned the handles. The very same kind of ribbons she'd seen that day months ago when she burst through those doors into the wrong wedding. Ava's hands trembled as she gathered her purse and the flowers. Before she could reach for the door, it swung open from within. Miriam stood there, elegant in a powder blue dress, her eyes sparkling with joy. "Perfect timing, dear," she said, accepting the flowers. "Though we already have plenty." She gestured inside, where Ava could now see that the interior had been completely transformed. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across pews lined with fresh flowers. The exact same arrangement from that first wedding day. "Miriam," Ava whispered, her voice catching. "What's happening?" The older woman simply squeezed her hand. "Sometimes the wrong door leads you exactly where you're meant to be." Soft organ music began to play, not the traditional wedding march, but rather the gentle hymn Ava often played for her patients at the hospice. Her feet carried her forward without conscious thought, past the smiling faces of friends and colleagues, and there at the altar stood Adriel. He wore a simple charcoal suit, his silver hair catching the colored light from the windows. His expression was tender, filled with something Ava had seen growing over these past months, but had never dared to name. As she reached the front of the chapel, he stepped forward, taking both her hands in his. The familiar twinkle appeared in his eyes as he spoke. "You're at the wrong wedding," he said softly, his voice carrying in the hushed space. Then, with a gentle smile that held all the love in the world, he added, "Or are you here for me instead?" Tears streamed down Ava's cheeks as understanding dawned. This wasn't just a recreation of their first meeting. It was a redemption of it, a transformation of that moment of embarrassment into something beautiful. "Ava Porter," Adriel continued, his own eyes growing misty. "That day you crashed through these doors, you didn't just interrupt a wedding. You broke down walls I'd built around my heart. You showed me that faith isn't about control or certainty. It's about trust and grace." He reached into his pocket, producing a simple gold ring. "I'm not asking you to finish someone else's story anymore. I'm asking you to start a new one with me." His voice grew thick with emotion. "Will you marry me?" Ava could barely see through her tears, but her heart had never been clearer. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." The gathered congregation erupted in applause and cheers. Miriam dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, beaming with maternal pride. Through the stained glass windows, the afternoon sun seemed to shine even brighter, as if heaven itself was celebrating. Adriel slipped the ring onto her finger. Perfect fit. Ava noticed an inscription inside. "Right place, right time, right love." When? She managed to ask through happy tears. "How did you plan all this?" "I've been planning it since that night you came back for dinner," he admitted. "I knew then that God hadn't made a mistake that first day. He'd given us both a second chance at love. We just needed time to recognize it." The pastor stepped forward, smiling warmly. "Well," he said, "since we're all here and the bride has said yes, shall we make this official?" Ava looked around at the chapel filled with loved ones, at Miriam's joy-filled face, at the man who had gone from stranger to soulmate in the most unexpected way. This time there was no confusion, no embarrassment, no need to run. This time she was exactly where she belonged. "Yes," she said clearly, squeezing Adriel's hands. "I think it's about time we had the right wedding in the wrong chapel." The pastor opened his Bible, and the afternoon light streamed through the windows, painting everything in colors of promise and possibility. As he began to speak, Ava caught Adriel's eye and saw in his expression everything she'd ever hoped to find. Love, faith, and the certainty that sometimes life's biggest mistakes can lead to its greatest blessings. The same flowers, the same chapel, but a completely different story. One of redemption, of second chances, of love that grows not from perfect moments but from the beautiful mess of real life. As Ava stood there holding hands with the man she would marry, she understood that God's plans often look nothing like our own, but they're always, always better. The late afternoon sun painted golden streaks through the chapel windows as the ceremony began. Ava and Adriel stood before the altar, their hands clasped together, surrounded by the warm glow of candlelight and the loving faces of their closest friends and family. Miriam sat proudly in her wheelchair in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief. She wore an elegant powder blue dress that matched the flowers decorating the pews, her silver hair swept up elegantly. The joy radiating from her face seemed to light up the entire chapel. The pastor's voice rang clear and warm through the intimate space. "We gather here today to witness something extraordinary, a love story that began with what seemed like a mistake, but was actually divine providence in disguise." Quiet laughter rippled through the small congregation. Ava felt Adriel squeeze her hands gently, his eyes twinkling with that special warmth she'd grown to cherish. When the time came for vows, Adriel spoke first, his voice steady but full of emotion. "Ava, when you burst through those doors that day, you didn't just interrupt a wedding, you interrupted my entire life. I had built walls around my heart, convinced that order and control were the only way forward. But you showed me that real strength lies in being vulnerable enough to love again." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "You brought laughter back into my home, light back into my mother's eyes, and faith back into my soul. I vow to spend every day thanking God for leading you through the wrong door at exactly the right time. I promise to cherish your compassionate heart, support your calling to care for others, and walk beside you in both sunshine and storm." Tears slipped down Ava's cheeks as she began her own vows. "Adriel, I came to this chapel that day thinking I needed to save someone else. Instead, God used that moment to begin saving me. Through all the chaos that followed, your kindness never wavered. You offered shelter when I was lost, understanding when I was hurt, and grace when I needed it most." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "I vow to fill our home with the same warmth and acceptance you showed me. I promise to support your dreams, share your burdens, and remind you daily that sometimes the best plans are the ones we never made. Most of all, I vow to trust in the God who turned my biggest embarrassment into my greatest blessing." From her wheelchair, Miriam let out a happy sob, prompting gentle laughter from the gathered guests. The pastor smiled warmly as he led them through their rings and pronouncement. When he finally declared them husband and wife, Adriel pulled Ava close with tender reverence. Their first kiss as a married couple was sweet and gentle, full of promise. The small crowd erupted in heartfelt cheers and applause, their joy echoing off the chapel's high ceiling. Miriam's voice rang out above the others. "Praise the Lord!" As evening approached, the celebration moved to the lakeside behind their home. Hundreds of twinkling fairy lights had been strung between the trees, creating a magical canopy that reflected off the calm water. Tables draped in white linen held simple but elegant flower arrangements, and soft music drifted across the grounds from a small string quartet. Ava had changed into a simpler dress for the reception, one that allowed her to move freely. She'd kicked off her shoes, preferring to feel the grass beneath her feet. Adriel watched her with amused affection as she wiggled her toes in delight. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Trent?" he asked, extending his hand with a playful bow. Ava's heart skipped at her new name. "Always, Mr. Trent," she replied, taking his hand. They swayed together beneath the stars, their movements natural and unhurried. The fairy lights created a gentle glow around them, and the music seemed to blend perfectly with the sound of small waves lapping at the shore. "I've never seen you look so alive," Adrielle murmured, pulling her closer. Ava rested her head against his chest, feeling his steady heartbeat. "I've never felt so alive," she admitted. "It's like I can finally breathe deeply again." Later in the evening, they stood together at the water's edge, their fingers intertwined. The moon cast a silver path across the lake, and the night air was filled with the sweet scent of jasmine from Miriam's garden. "I have something to tell you," Adrielle said softly. "I've been working on a project, and I want you to be a part of it." Ava turned to face him, curiosity bright in her eyes. "We're reopening the foundation," he explained, "but with a new purpose. The Ava Porter Care Trust will be dedicated to supporting hospice and elderly care programs. Your work has shown me what truly matters. Not just treating illness but nurturing spirits and protecting dignity." Ava's breath caught in her throat. "Adrielle, you've taught me that true wealth isn't measured in profit margins," he continued, drawing her close. "It's measured in the comfort we bring to others, in the grace we show in difficult moments, in the love we share when it matters most." Tears glimmered in Ava's eyes as she wrapped her arms around him. Behind them, the fairy lights twinkled like earthbound stars, and the gentle lap of water against the shore provided a peaceful rhythm to their embrace. The evening air carried the sound of laughter and music from their celebrating guests, reminding them that they weren't alone in their joy. From her place near the refreshment table, Miriam watched her son and new daughter-in-law with satisfied contentment, knowing that her home would now always be filled with the warmth of true love and genuine faith. The gentle autumn breeze carried the scent of pine and jasmine across Lake Waverly as life settled into a peaceful rhythm at the Trent household. Weeks after their wedding, Ava and Adrielle had found their own dance of daily routines, sharing quiet moments between busy schedules and creating a home filled with love and laughter. Ava transformed the sunlit corner room into the foundation's headquarters, its windows offering a calming view of the lake. She spent her mornings there reviewing applications from families struggling with hospice care costs, coordinating with local healthcare providers, and ensuring that no one faced end-of-life decisions alone. The work fulfilled her in ways she'd never expected, allowing her to extend her nurturing spirit far beyond the walls of their home. Miriam flourished under Ava's continued care. Her strength returned steadily, and soon she was able to tend to her beloved garden again, though Ava kept a watchful eye from nearby. The older woman's sharp wit remained intact, but it had softened, wrapped now in warmth and gratitude rather than defensive pride. "You've brought life back to this house?" Miriam told Ava one morning as they arranged fresh flowers in the kitchen. "Not just for Adrielle, but for me, too. God knew exactly what he was doing when he led you through those chapel doors." Adrielle adapted to working remotely, setting up his office down the hall from Ava's. He found himself taking more breaks throughout the day, drawn to the sound of his wife's gentle laughter or his mother's humming. The corporate world that had once consumed him now felt properly sized, important but no longer all-encompassing. On this particular evening, the sky painted itself in brilliant oranges and pinks as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Ava and Adrielle sat together on the wraparound porch, sharing the comfortable silence of two hearts completely at peace. The wooden swing creaked softly as they swayed, Ava's head resting against her husband's shoulder. "I still can't believe I walked into the wrong wedding," Ava mused, a hint of laughter in her voice as she remembered that chaotic day. Adrielle's chest rumbled with a soft chuckle. His arm tightened around her shoulders as he pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. "No, love, you walked into the right life." Ava's eyes grew misty at his words. She thought about how God had turned her moment of greatest embarrassment into the path to her greatest joy. The viral video that had seemed like a disaster had led her here, to this porch, to this man, to this life filled with purpose and love. Together, they watched the sun sink lower, casting long shadows across the lawn. The lake water sparkled like scattered diamonds, and somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill began its evening song. Without speaking, they joined hands and bowed their heads in prayer. "Dear Lord," Ava began softly, "thank you for your perfect timing, even when we can't understand it. Thank you for turning our endings into beginnings. Thank you for second chances, Adriel continued, his voice thick with emotion. For showing us that love doesn't end with loss but can bloom again when we least expect it. Thank you for grace. They finished together, their fingers intertwined. As they opened their eyes, the last rays of sunlight painted everything in golden hues. Through the open window behind them, they could hear Miriam humming an old hymn as she prepared evening tea, a sound that had become as much a part of their home as the creaking of floorboards or the whisper of wind through pine needles. Ava turned to look at her husband, seeing in his face the same contentment she felt in her heart. The man who had once hidden behind corporate success now wore his joy openly, unafraid to show the world how love had transformed him. "Shall we join your mother for tea?" she asked, standing and offering him a hand. Adriel smiled, taking it and rising to his feet. "In a minute," he said, pulling her close for one more moment. "I just want to remember this right here, right now, how perfectly everything worked out." Ava nodded, understanding completely. Every day felt like a gift. Every moment a reminder that faith could guide them through any storm to find the peace waiting on the other side. As they stood together on their porch, watching the day's final light fade into dusk, they were filled with gratitude for the strange and wonderful path that had brought them together. Their story had begun with a mistake, but it had grown into something beautiful, a testament to God's ability to weave hope from confusion, joy from sorrow, and lasting love from a single moment of divine timing. The evening star appeared in the darkening sky, a bright point of light above the lake. Its reflection shimmered on the water, a heavenly reminder of the light that had guided them to each other. With hearts full of thankfulness, they turned toward the warm glow of their home, ready to embrace whatever new blessings tomorrow might bring. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow, I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.